What if I told you that the first sin was not an act of simple disobedience in a garden, but a calculated act of high treason in a celestial palace? What if, long before Adam ever reached for the forbidden fruit, Lucifer had already committed a cosmic crime, a legal transgression so profound that its history, its motives, and its verdict have been systematically erased from our origin story? For centuries, we have been taught that the narrative of sin begins with humanity, with a simple choice between a piece of fruit and a divine command. But the ancient texts, when read not as fables but as legal and historical records, tell a different, far more staggering story. They speak of a fall that was not a moral failing, but a political coup, a crime that was not just committed, but prosecuted in the highest court of the universe. Most people read the biblical account of Lucifer's fall and see only poetry and metaphor. But you are here. You are here because you sense that the sheer scale and organized nature of evil in our world points to an origin story that is far more complex and far more judicial. You are ready to look beyond the garden and into the courtroom. This journey will not be a simple retelling of a familiar myth. We will step into the role of cosmic investigators. We will unseal the prophetic indictments from the books of Isaiah and Ezekiel. We will examine the evidence, piece together the motives, and reconstruct the case of the first and greatest act of treason in the history of the universe. Once you understand the true legal nature of this first sin, you will never see the story of the fall in Eden the same way again. Before we open this ancient case file, be sure that you are subscribed with notifications enabled. The cosmic courtroom is now in session, and the evidence you are about to hear has been hidden for millennia. Before we call the first witness or present a single piece of evidence, we must first establish the nature and the jurisdiction of this proceeding. Let us be clear from the outset. What we are embarking upon today is not a simple retelling of an ancient story. We are formally opening a court case, a cosmic trial that has been in recess for millennia. This is not a lecture hall, it is a courtroom, and the historical tapestry we are about to weave is that of a legal and political drama of the highest order. Let us formally convene this court. The case is the Kingdom of Heaven versus the Anointed Cherub, a being later known as Lucifer. The charge, as we will demonstrate, is not a vague sin of pride, but the specific capital crime of cosmic high treason. The prosecution will call two primary witnesses to the stand, the prophet Isaiah and the prophet Ezekiel. These were men who, by divine summons, were granted unprecedented access to the celestial court records and were commanded to preserve their testimony for this very day. The evidence to be presented will be damning, consisting of financial records detailing a treasonous commerce and, most critically, a direct 5-point confession from the defendant's own mouth, a manifesto of his seditious intent. And you, the viewer, are not a passive audience. For the purpose of this investigation, you are the jury. Your task is to set aside the simplified narratives you have been taught, to listen to the testimony with the discerning ear of a juror, and to weigh the evidence as it is presented. Our goal is not to tell a story that feels good, but to reconstruct a case that is true. The historical tapestry we are examining is not one of myth and metaphor, but one of law, politics, and the ultimate crime. The court is now in session. Every courtroom, every legal case is defined by the law. Before we can comprehend the true nature of Lucifer's crime, we must first understand the fundamental law of the realm in which it was committed. This was not a law written on tablets of stone or scrolls of parchment. It was a law woven into the very fabric of existence, a principle of spiritual physics as absolute and as omnipresent as gravity. Before the 10 Commandments were ever spoken into the air of Sinai, a single foundational statute governed the primordial cosmos. That law can be summarized in a single, powerful concept. All glory flows to the throne. This was not a rule born of divine ego or a demand for arbitrary submission. It was the very architecture of reality, the engine of all life and light. The throne of the uncreated God was the single, central, unassailable source of all being, all power, and all glory. Every created entity, from the most magnificent cherub to the smallest celestial servant, was designed to be a perfect vessel, a living conduit. Their purpose was to receive the infinite, life-giving current of glory that emanated from the throne, and then, in a joyful and reflexive act of worship, to reflect that glory back to its source, amplified and colored by their own unique, created essence. This was not a transaction. It was a state of being. It was the great cosmic circulatory system, and the throne of God was its eternally beating heart. This was the spiritual atmosphere of the unfallen universe. It was a constant, frictionless, and thunderous symphony of praise. To participate in this unending flow of glory was to be fully alive, to be perpetually energized, to be constantly affirmed in one's created purpose. There was no concept of scarcity, for the source was infinite. There was no concept of envy, for each being's unique reflection of glory was a necessary and celebrated part of the whole. The law was not a burden. It was the very definition of freedom and joy. To step outside of this current, to attempt to hold on to the glory for oneself, was not just an act of disobedience. It was an act of spiritual suicide. It was to sever oneself from the only source of life that existed. The crime that Lucifer was contemplating, therefore, was not merely a violation of a celestial social contract. He was not just planning to break a rule. He was attempting to defy the most fundamental law of reality. He was about to try and reverse the irreversible current of the cosmos, to build a dam in the river of life and declare himself the new, independent reservoir. This was the law he sought to break, and the breaking of it would not just make him a sinner, it would make him the source of a new and terrible physics, the physics of death. Before we call the witnesses and present the evidence of the crime, it is essential that we, the jury, look upon the accused. We must see him not as the monstrous caricature he would become, but as he was in his original state, in the full context of his primordial glory. To truly comprehend the depth and the tragedy of his cosmic treason, we must first appreciate the dizzying height from which he fell. The prophet Ezekiel, in his 28th chapter, does not paint the portrait of a demon with horns and a pitchfork. He gives us a deposition, a character witness statement from God himself, describing a defendant who was, in his beginning, the pinnacle of all creation. He was not born into shadow or forged in some lesser fire. He was, in God's own words, the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. This was not just another angel among the countless heavenly host. This was the masterpiece of the divine artist, a being upon whom the Creator had lavished the full measure of his creative genius. Imagine for a moment a creature whose very form was a living testament to the infinite imagination of God, a being woven from the light of supernovas and the fire of the divine presence itself. The text describes him as being adorned with every precious stone known to creation: sardius and topaz, diamond and beryl, onyx and jasper. as if the entire mineral glory of the universe had been gathered and forged into his very fabric. He did not just exist, he radiated. His every movement would have been a display of effortless grace, his every word a note of perfect, unblemished wisdom, and his station was as glorious as his form. He was given a position of unparalleled honor and intimacy, a role that placed him at the very epicenter of cosmic reality. You were the anointed cherub who covers, the text declares. As we have explored, this was not a minor ceremonial title. This was the high priest of the heavens, the chief guardian of the very throne room of God, the one who stood perpetually in the fiery, unveiled presence of his Creator. He walked back and forth in the midst of the stones of fire, a phrase that suggests a level of comfort and familiarity with the raw, unmediated holiness of God that was granted to no other. He was not just a citizen of the kingdom, he was a member of the inner circle, a trusted custodian of the most sacred space in all of existence. The scripture is clear. He was blameless in his ways from the day he was created. But it was within this very perfection, within the flawless architecture of his being, that a shadow began to form in his heart. It was not a flaw in his design, but a terrible potential that existed within the freedom he was given. He began to look at the glory that flowed through him, and, in a subtle but catastrophic shift of perception, he began to mistake it for a glory that originated from him. The immense trust placed in him began to feel like an entitlement. The honor he was given began to feel like an inherent right. The love he received from the Creator began to feel like an admiration he had earned. He was no longer content to be the most beautiful poem. He began to believe he was the poet. He was the perfect creation, the model citizen, the trusted high priest. But in the secret courtroom of his own heart, a criminal motive was being formed. The belief that his perfection made him worthy of a throne that was not and could never be his own. The conflict that was brewing within Lucifer's heart was not a simple rivalry. He had no equal among the created beings who could serve as a legitimate competitor. His struggle was not against Michael or any other archangel who might challenge his position in the celestial hierarchy. His true and ultimate adversary was something far more fundamental, far more powerful, and far more absolute. The opposing force he chose to confront was the very system of reality in which he existed. It was the unshakable, foundational principle of the cosmos, the absolute supremacy of the throne. In the divine economy, as we have established, all glory, all worship, all authority flowed in a single, unidirectional current, upward toward the throne of the uncreated Creator. This was not an arbitrary rule enforced by a celestial tyrant to feed a divine ego. It was the very physics of spiritual life, the unalterable law that maintained the harmony, the stability, and the very existence of all the realms. Every being, no matter how glorious, was created as a reflection, a vessel designed to receive the infinite, life-giving light of God and reflect it back to its source with an added, unique note of praise and gratitude. This was the great cosmic current of life, and to be a part of it was to be fully and truly alive. But Lucifer, in the perfection of his wisdom and the splendor of his beauty, began to experience a profound and dangerous shift in perception. He started to see the glory that flowed through him and, in a catastrophic miscalculation, mistook it for a glory that originated from him. He began to see himself not as a brilliant conduit, but as a rival source. The system that required all worship to be directed to the one central throne became, in his eyes, an obstacle to his own self-realization, a limitation on his own perceived divinity. The unalterable law that he was a creature, a masterpiece of the Creator, began to feel less like an honor and more like a cosmic injustice. This is the very nature of the highest form of pride. It does not seek to destroy the system. It seeks to become a rival system. Lucifer did not yet hate God. He simply began to believe that he was worthy of the same status. The opposing force, therefore, was not a personal enemy, but a metaphysical principle. It was the principle that there could only be one uncreated source of all glory, one uncaused cause, one ultimate center of all worship in the universe. It was the supremacy of the throne. And it was this foundational, unalterable fact of his own createdness that the most perfect being in all of creation began to resent, to question, and finally to wage a legal and spiritual war against. He was not just breaking a rule, he was attempting to rewrite the very constitutional laws of spiritual physics, to establish a second, independent branch of government in a kingdom that was designed for absolute monarchy. The internal constitutional crisis within Lucifer's heart did not remain a secret for long. The first piece of hard evidence of his treasonous plot, the fateful whisper that would become the first article in his indictment, is recorded by the prophet Ezekiel. It is a single, cryptic, and often misunderstood phrase that reveals the very mechanism of his rebellion. By the abundance of your trading, God declares, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Let us place this phrase on the evidence table and examine it with forensic care. What was this trading? In a celestial realm of pure spirit, what commodities were being exchanged? The text is not speaking of the commerce of timber and purple dye that the earthly king of Tyre was famous for. This is a spiritual, political commerce. This trading in the original Hebrew rakula carries the sense of going about, of trafficking, of peddling wares from one place to another. Lucifer, the high priest of heaven, had become a traveling salesman of sedition. This was the fateful whisper that began to spread through the heavenly courts. It was the whisper of a better deal, of a new arrangement. He was trafficking in ideas, peddling a new and intoxicating ideology of self-deification. He was moving through the celestial realms, through the hierarchies of thrones and dominions, and he was making offers. To some, he likely offered promotion, a higher rank in his proposed new order. To others, he offered autonomy, a release from the perceived tyranny of absolute submission to the one throne. To all, he offered a share in the glory that he now believed he could generate himself. This was the beginning of his crime. It was an act of cosmic corporate espionage. He was using his privileged insider access to the courts of heaven to build a portfolio of allies, to create a faction of disgruntled and ambitious spirits who were willing to trade their allegiance to the Creator for a stock option in his new, rebellious enterprise. The violence that filled him was not the violence of swords and spears, not yet. It was the subtle, internal violence of a heart that was actively plotting the overthrow of its rightful government. This was Exhibit A, the paper trail of a conspiracy, the record of a treasonous trade in the one currency that truly mattered in the heavens, the currency of loyalty. Lucifer's treasonous trading was not a brief or impulsive act. It was a long, patient, and strategic wilderness journey through the political landscape of the heavens. He did not appear before the angelic host as a wild-eyed revolutionary demanding an overnight coup. He presented himself as a reformer, a visionary, a voice of reason in a kingdom he now began to frame as stagnant and restrictive. His journey was a masterclass in political maneuvering, a campaign to build his legal and popular case against the divine administration before a single act of open war was ever declared. It was a slow, deliberate poisoning of the well of celestial loyalty. He moved through the different realms, the vast and varied provinces of the cosmic empire, and he tailored his message to his audience with the skill of a master rhetorician. To the lower orders of angels, the countless foot soldiers and civil servants of the kingdom, he likely spoke the seductive language of grievance and inequality. He would have pointed to the rigid, seemingly unchangeable hierarchy and whispered of a new system based not on divine appointment, but on merit. He was not just offering rebellion, he was offering a career path, a promotion, a chance to be more than what they were created to be. He offered them a stake in his new progressive enterprise. To his peers, the other celestial princes, the thrones and dominions who governed their own cosmic sectors, his argument would have been more sophisticated, more political. He would have spoken the language of partnership, of shared governance, of a new and more enlightened age where the universe was not ruled by a single absolute monarch, but by a council of its most brilliant minds, a parliament of the gods. He was offering them a seat at the boardroom table of his new corporation, a chance to move from being mere governors to becoming shareholders in the cosmos itself. He framed his ambition not as a grab for singular power, but as a movement toward a more distributed, more democratic form of cosmic rule. This was his wilderness journey. It was a period of intense lobbying, of secret meetings in the distant corridors of heaven, of forging alliances and gathering support by exploiting the unique vanities and ambitions of each angelic order. He was not just gathering an army, he was building a legal case, creating a coalition of co-conspirators who would stand with him when the time came to formally present his challenge to the throne. The Book of Revelation tells us the terrifying result of this campaign. His seductive message was so powerful that he successfully convinced a third of the angelic host to join his cause. His case was built, his faction was formed, and the wilderness journey was now leading him to the final fatal step, a public declaration of his intent, an open challenge to the unshakable supremacy of the throne. The heavenly campaign of recruitment was now complete. The allegiances had been secretly sworn, the treasonous deals had been struck. A third of the angelic host, from the highest orders of the cherubim to the legions of the lower realms, had transferred their loyalty from the eternal king to the charismatic rebel prince. The conspiracy was set. The shadow government had been formed. And in that moment, a profound and terrible silence fell upon the heavens. It was the calm before the storm, a moment of cosmic tension so thick that the very fabric of reality seemed to hold its breath. On the surface, the rituals of heaven continued. The choirs of the faithful still sang their praises, but their songs were now tinged with a note of sorrowful anticipation, for they could feel the growing dissonance, the silent section in the cosmic orchestra, where a third of the musicians had laid down their instruments in quiet protest. The rivers of light still flowed from the throne, but they flowed through a kingdom that was now divided against itself, a house filled with both loyal sons and secret traitors. The unfallen angels moved through the celestial courts with a new and heavy watchfulness, their gazes searching, their spirits troubled, for they knew that a cancer had taken root in the heart of their perfect world. This was not a peaceful silence. It was the charged, heavy quiet of a courtroom just before the indictment is read. It was the stillness of two armies arrayed on a battlefield, watching each other across a valley of decision, each waiting for the first trumpet of war to sound. Lucifer had played his hand in the shadows. He had gathered his forces. He had established his political base. Now he waited, poised to make his final move, to transition from a secret political rebellion to an open, public challenge against the authority of the Most High. The entire universe paused, suspended in this moment of terrifying anticipation. The last chance for peace had passed. The first war, the war that would shatter the original perfection of creation, was now inevitable. Heaven held its breath. And now we present Exhibit B, the second and most damning piece of evidence in the indictment against Lucifer. This is the moment the secret conspiracy erupted into a public declaration of treason, the moment the whisper of rebellion became a roar. The unveiling fire of this revelation comes to us through the prophet Isaiah, who, in his 14th chapter, was granted a stunning and terrifying glimpse into the celestial court. He was allowed to overhear the very words of Lucifer's seditious manifesto. What he recorded was not a fleeting thought, not a momentary lapse into pride. It was a calculated 5-point plan for a hostile takeover of the cosmos, a sworn oath of self-deification. Let us now examine each of these 5 I will statements as a separate count in the indictment, for each one reveals a deeper layer of his criminal intent. Count 1. I will ascend into heaven. Let us analyze this first oath with the precision it deserves. This is not a declaration of physical movement, but of spiritual and political ambition. He was already a being of the heavens, dwelling in the highest realms, in the very presence of God. So what does he mean by ascend? He is speaking the language of hierarchy, of rank, of authority. This is a declaration of his intent to illegally seize a higher position than the one he was created for. It is a rejection of his divinely appointed station. He was the Anointed Cherub, the guardian of the throne, but he was not satisfied. He wanted to move from the position of Prime Minister to the position of King. This is the foundational crime of seditious ambition. Count 2. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. This second oath reveals the political dimension of his treason. The stars of God, in ancient Hebrew cosmology, were often understood to be the other high-ranking angelic beings, his peers in the divine council, the princes of the celestial court. This is a direct challenge to his fellow rulers. He is not just seeking a personal promotion. He is seeking to dismantle the entire governmental structure. It is a declaration of his intent to establish a rival, autocratic government and to place himself in a position of absolute supremacy over all other created authorities. It is the crime of insurrection. Count 3. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation in the farthest sides of the north. This is perhaps the most specific and legally damning of all his declarations. According to the text and the understanding of the ancient world, the Mount of the Congregation was a reference to the cosmic Mount Zion, the very seat of divine government, the place where the universal assembly of the sons of God convened. He is announcing his intent to seize the legislative and executive heart of the kingdom. This is not just a rebellion. It is a meticulously planned coup d'etat aimed at occupying the capital city of the heavens. Count 4. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. This is a vow to breach the ultimate boundary of creation. In the symbolic geography of the heavens, the clouds often represented the veil, the boundary that separated the created realms from the uncreated, unapproachable glory of God himself. He is declaring his intent to transgress the very laws of spiritual physics, to enter a state of being reserved for the uncreated God alone. It is the crime of metaphysical trespass. And count 5, the final and most blasphemous charge, the one that encompasses all the others. I will be like the Most High. This is the ultimate confession. It is the declaration of his intent to establish himself as a rival deity, to divert the flow of worship from its one true source and redirect it toward himself. He knew he could not be God, an uncreated being, but he believed he could replicate his authority, his glory, and his position of worship. He sought to become a co-equal, a rival center of power, an alternative God. This is the ultimate crime, the one for which there is no forgiveness. It is the crime of cosmic high treason. This 5-point oath is not poetry, it is a sworn confession. It is the irrefutable evidence of a premeditated, calculated, and malicious plot to overthrow the government of heaven and to establish a rival kingdom built on the lie of self-deification. The evidence is now before the jury. After the thunderous, treasonous oaths of Lucifer had been publicly declared, a profound and solemn silence fell upon the heavens once more. But this was not the tense silence of anticipation. It was the heavy, final silence of judgment. The case had been made. The evidence from the defendant's own mouth was irrefutable. The cosmic courtroom had heard the indictment, the great I Will manifesto, and now the verdict was to be rendered by the one and only supreme judge, the king whose authority had been so arrogantly challenged. The prophet Ezekiel, in the 28th chapter, records this swift and terrible sentence. There is no lengthy deliberation, no appeal process. The judgment is as immediate and as absolute as the crime itself. The voice from the throne speaks, and in its words, we hear the legal and spiritual consequences of cosmic treason. Therefore, God declares, I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the stones of fire. Let us analyze the precise legal language of this verdict, for every word is weighted with eternal significance. First, I cast you as a profane thing. The Hebrew word for profane here, shalal, means to defile, to pollute, to desecrate. He who was once the seal of perfection, the embodiment of holiness, is now legally and ontologically reclassified. His sacred status is officially and permanently revoked. He is no longer holy, he is now a source of cosmic contamination. Second, he is cast out of the mountain of God and from the midst of the stones of fire. This is the sentence of exile, the stripping of all political and priestly authority. He is banished from the heavenly Eden, forever barred from the holy presence of the throne he was created to guard. The high priest of the universe is defrocked and excommunicated in a single divine decree. And third, the text says, I destroyed you. This does not mean annihilation, for we know he continues to exist. The Hebrew word here implies a destruction of his office, his purpose, and his original, glorious state. He is ruined. His perfect design has been irrevocably corrupted by his own choice, and he is now a shattered, broken version of what he once was. His very nature has been fundamentally and permanently altered by his treason. The trial is over. The defendant has been found guilty on all counts. The verdict is in, and the sentence of expulsion is about to be carried out with the force of a falling star. The execution of the verdict was not a quiet, dignified removal from office. It was a violent, cataclysmic expulsion, an act of divine judgment that sent the first great shockwave of sin's consequence ripping through the fabric of the cosmos. The Book of Revelation describes this moment as an active military engagement, with Michael and the loyal angelic armies physically driving the great dragon and his followers from the celestial realm. This was not a negotiated surrender. It was a forcible eviction on a cosmic scale. Jesus himself, in the Gospel of Luke, described the moment with the imagery of a violent, instantaneous event. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. This was the sentence being carried out. Lucifer, the convicted traitor, was not allowed a period of appeal or a moment to gather his belongings. He was seized, and along with the third of the heavenly host who had joined his conspiracy, he was hurled from the heights of heaven. The first ripple of his judgment was a great gravitational fall from the highest realms of light and order into the lower, unformed dimensions of the physical cosmos. But this expulsion was not into a void of non-existence, nor was it into a designated prison. The sentence was one of exile to a lower realm, a transfer of jurisdiction. He was cast down to the earth, and he did not come alone. He brought his entire corporate structure with him, his hierarchy of thrones, dominions, principalities and powers, the co-conspirators who had been found guilty alongside him. His kingdom had not been annihilated, it had been relocated. His cosmic trade empire, once headquartered in the glorious courts of the heavenly Eden, had now been forced to set up a new, hostile base of operations in a lower dimension, a realm that would one day be prepared for Adam. The planet that had been created in perfection was now, in that moment, about to become a penal colony, the designated territory for a legion of defeated but not yet disarmed rebels. The war in heaven was over. The verdict had been rendered. But the terrible consequence of that verdict, the first ripple of that cosmic trial, was about to create a new and devastating war on a new and vulnerable front. The war for planet Earth. Now that the trial is complete, the verdict rendered, and the sentence of expulsion carried out, we can finally step back from the poetic and prophetic language of the scriptures and, as forensic investigators, give a precise legal name to the crime that was committed. The theological language we often use, words like pride or sin, while true, are too general. They are moral categories that fail to capture the specific political and legal nature of Lucifer's act. With the evidence now fully before us, we can decode the signs, analyze the motives, and name his crime with the kind of accuracy that would be used in a high court of law. This was not a moral failing. This was cosmic high treason. In any kingdom, from the most ancient empire to the most modern nation, treason is considered the most severe of all crimes. It is not merely an offense against a person, it is a direct assault on the very personification and authority of the state itself. It is an attempt to overthrow the established government, to dissolve the constitutional order, and to usurp a power that is not one's own. Lucifer's actions, when examined through this legal lens, fit the definition of high treason with a terrifying precision. Let us review the case. His trading, as described by Ezekiel, was a clear act of conspiracy and sedition, a campaign to build a faction of co-conspirators with the intent of undermining the sitting government. This was not a simple act of disobedience. It was a premeditated plot to form a rival political party within the courts of heaven. His 5 "I will" statements, as recorded by Isaiah, are nothing less than a public declaration of insurrection, a sworn manifesto for a coup d'état. They are the celestial equivalent of a rebel general seizing the broadcast stations and announcing his intent to march on the capital. His ultimate stated goal, to be like the Most High, was a direct and unambiguous attempt to usurp the unique, unshareable sovereignty of the one true king. By naming the crime as Cosmic High Treason, we move the story from the realm of myth and into the realm of political and legal reality. This was not a vague spiritual struggle between abstract forces of good and evil. It was a constitutional crisis in the kingdom of heaven, a failed political revolution. And the judgment that followed was not an emotional outburst of divine anger. It was the just and necessary legal consequence for the highest possible crime a created being could commit against its sovereign creator. This is the sign we must decode. The first sin was not a bite of a forbidden fruit. It was a carefully planned, politically motivated act of high treason. And understanding this legal foundation is the key to understanding the entire cosmic conflict that followed. But is there any further evidence for the existence of this complex political and hierarchical government that Lucifer sought to overthrow? To fully corroborate the testimony of the canonical prophets, we must once again call our forgotten witness to the stand. For the Book of Enoch, a text that preserves one of the most ancient streams of Hebrew cosmology, does not just hint at a celestial government, it provides the organizational chart. It is the forgotten constitutional document that confirms the very structure of the kingdom that was attacked. Enoch's visions, which he claims were shown to him by the archangel Uriel, do not depict a simplistic, homogeneous heaven populated by a single class of beings called angels. Instead, they reveal a universe administered by a sophisticated and highly stratified bureaucracy, a multi-layered government of celestial beings with specific titles, ranks, and jurisdictions. He describes a cosmos that is intensely and unapologetically political. He speaks of the highest orders who perpetually surround the throne of the Lord of Spirits, the cherubim, the seraphim, and the ophanim, who form the inner circle of the divine court, the celestial cabinet. He then names the 4 great archangels who stand on the 4 sides of the throne: Michael, the commander of the armies; Raphael, the angel of healing; Gabriel, the chief messenger; and Phanuel, the angel of repentance. These are the prime ministers of the heavenly kingdom, each with their own distinct portfolio of responsibilities. But the structure of this government extends outward and downward from there with a breathtaking complexity. Enoch speaks of chiefs of the thousands, princes, rulers, and authorities, a clear and deliberate chain of command that administers the affairs of the cosmos. He describes how the stars are themselves angelic beings and that they too have leaders and are held accountable for their actions in the divine court. He even details the functions of different angelic departments, from those who govern the seasons to those who preside over the winds and the storehouses of the snow. This is the forgotten testimony of Enoch. It transforms the divine counsel from a shadowy, abstract concept into a vivid, functioning government. It confirms that the kings Ezekiel spoke of were real. It confirms that the stars of God Isaiah mentioned were specific ranks of authority. And most critically, it proves that Lucifer's sin was not just a personal spiritual rebellion. It was a calculated and organized coup d'etat, a civil war that erupted within the intricate and ancient corridors of a real, functioning, and highly complex cosmic administration. The testimony of this forgotten witness is the final piece of evidence that proves the crime was not just a fall from grace. It was an act of high treason against a sitting government. And now, with the legal nature of Lucifer's crime firmly established and the political context of his rebellion fully illuminated, the great cosmic thread, the profound aha moment of our entire investigation, becomes blindingly and terrifyingly clear. The act of cosmic high treason committed by Lucifer in the heavenly Eden was not a singular contained event that ended with his expulsion. It became the blueprint. It was the original sin, the archetypal rebellion, the spiritual and legal precedent that would define the very nature of all sin that followed. Every subsequent act of rebellion against God, whether human or angelic, is in its very essence a tragic and often unconscious reenactment of this first primordial crime. Let us trace this thread from the celestial to the terrestrial. For centuries, we have viewed the sin of Adam in the earthly garden as a simple story of disobedience, a failure to follow a dietary rule. But when we view it through the legal and political lens of Lucifer's treason, we see the exact same dynamics at play, now tragically restaged on a human scale. Consider the temptation. The serpent, who we know to be the exiled Lucifer, does not just tempt Eve with a piece of fruit. He makes a political promise. He offers her a promotion in the cosmic hierarchy. "You will not surely die," he lies, "for God knows that in the day you eat of it your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Let us analyze this offer with the care it deserves. You will be like God. This is the exact same temptation to which Lucifer himself succumbed. It is the core promise of his treasonous manifesto. He is not offering simple pleasure. He is offering a transfer of sovereignty. The phrase "knowing good and evil" is not about a simple moral awareness. In the ancient Hebrew context, it is a legal idiom for ultimate autonomy, for the right to be the final arbiter of reality, to set one's own laws. It is the very definition of kingship. The serpent was not offering Eve a snack. He was offering her a throne. And Adam's sin, therefore, was not just that he ate. It was that in eating he was casting a vote. He was formally and legally siding with the rebel prince against the true king. He was committing his own human-scale act of high treason. He was attempting to secede his own will and the dominion of the earth that had been entrusted to him from the kingdom of God, and to establish his own independent kingdom with himself as the ultimate authority. Do you see it now? The fall of man was not a different kind of sin. It was a direct, tragic, and perfect echo of the fall of the angels. Lucifer's crime provided the very blueprint for our own. The first sin was not a bite of an apple in a garden. The first sin was an attempt to seize a throne in the heavens. And every sin since, from Adam's choice to our own daily rebellions, has been a smaller, sadder echo of that same cosmic treason. This dark and treasonous pattern, once established in the heavens by Lucifer and tragically echoed in Eden by Adam, did not end there. It became the recurring pathological heartbeat of fallen history. The blueprint of cosmic treason was copied and pasted again and again in the ambitions of men and the collective movements of nations. The scale of the rebellion grew from an individual to a civilization. Consider the Tower of Babel. This was not just an architectural project. It was a political and theological manifesto on a global scale. The declaration of the builders, recorded in the 11th chapter of Genesis, is a direct collective echo of Lucifer's 5 "I will" statements. "Come," they said, "let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves." Let us decode this declaration. The desire to make a name for ourselves is the very essence of Lucifer's pride, the hunger for a glory that is self-generated, not received. The ambition to build a tower whose top is in the heavens is a physical re-enactment of Lucifer's desire to ascend, to breach the boundary between the earthly and the divine, and to seize access to a higher realm on their own terms. The Tower of Babel was the sin of Lucifer, democratized. It was a collective act of human self-deification, an attempt to establish a unified, man-made authority in direct opposition to the authority of God. It was cosmic treason, enacted by a committee. And this recurring pattern reaches its ultimate terrifying climax in the prophetic visions of the end times. The final global antagonist, the figure known as the Antichrist, the man of sin, or the beast, is the perfect and final human incarnation of this same primordial rebellion. The Apostle Paul, in his second letter to the Thessalonians, describes him with chilling legal precision. He is the one who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. This is the final full-circle echo of Lucifer's original crime. The desire to be like the Most High, which began as a whisper in the heart of the Anointed Cherub, will find its final blasphemous expression in a human king who usurps the sacred space of the temple and declares himself to be the ultimate object of worship. The pattern is unbroken. The crime is the same. The treason that began in the heavenly Eden will find its final failed gasp in an earthly temple at the end of history, proving that the heart of all sin, from beginning to end, has always been the same: a war against the throne. This brings us to the final unsettling question of our cosmic court case. If this legal and political framework is so crucial, if the story of Lucifer's treason is the very blueprint for all subsequent sin, why was this case file buried? Why did the later scribes and theologians choose to obscure the legal nature of this first sin, presenting it instead as a vague moral failing of pride? The answer, most likely, lies in the profound discomfort of the indictment itself. To tell the story as a moral fable about a bad angel who became prideful is to keep the conflict at a safe theological distance. It allows us to view sin as a series of individual, personal mistakes, a matter of a flawed character. It is a story that, while tragic, is ultimately contained and manageable. It is a story that can be taught in a Sunday school classroom. But to tell the story as a legal case of cosmic high treason is to do something far more dangerous. It is to reveal that sin, at its very root, is not a mistake. It is a political choice. It is an act of allegiance to a rival kingdom. It forces us to confront the reality that we are not just neutral individuals who sometimes make bad choices. We are born into a universe that is in a state of cosmic civil war, and we are, by our very nature, citizens of a rebellious shadow government. This is not a comfortable legacy. It is far easier for religious institutions to teach a simple story about Adam and an apple than it is to explain a complex cosmic lawsuit. A moral failure can be corrected with better behavior, but treason requires a change of citizenship. The gatekeepers of the sacred tradition likely chose to simplify the narrative for the sake of pastoral care and doctrinal clarity. They buried the legal case file not to deceive, but to shield the faithful from a truth that was deemed too complex, too political, and too terrifying. But in their effort to make the story more manageable, they inadvertently buried the very key that unlocks the true nature of the cosmic conflict and, as we shall see, the profound legal solution that was achieved at the cross. The echo of this first cosmic court case did not fade with the expulsion of Lucifer from the heavens. It continues to resonate in our present age, not as a distant historical curiosity, but as a living, breathing indictment against the very operating system of our modern world and against the secret treason that so often takes place in the courtroom of our own hearts. The 5-point manifesto of rebellion that was first whispered in the heart of the Anointed Cherub has now become the unwritten, unspoken creed of a fallen humanity. Consider the world system in which we live. It is a civilization built on the very same 5 "I will" statements of the original rebel. "I will ascend," says the relentless heart of modern ambition, the endless pursuit of upward mobility, social status, and personal achievement. "I will exalt my own throne," says the spirit of radical individualism, the cultural mandate to build our own brand, to curate our own truth, to become the sovereign rulers of our own small digital kingdoms. "I will sit on the mount of the congregation," says our political and corporate desire for ultimate control, the belief that with the right technology, the right algorithm, the right system, we can finally solve the problems of humanity and build a perfect world without God. "I will ascend above the clouds," says our transhumanist quest to overcome the very limits of our createdness, to conquer death, to re-engineer our own biology, and to become the masters of our own evolution. And at the heart of it all, the driving force behind this entire global project is the same final, fatal whisper that was first spoken in the heavens. "I will be my own God." This is not a metaphor. This is a diagnosis of our spiritual condition. The spiritual DNA of Lucifer's treason has become the default programming of the fallen world. We see it in our politics, in our economies, in our entertainment, and most tragically, in the quiet, prideful chambers of our own hearts, every time we choose our own will over the will of our Creator. The indictment that was handed down against Lucifer in the primordial age is the same indictment that hangs over a humanity that has chosen again and again to follow his treasonous blueprint. The echo of that first cosmic trial is the constant low hum of a legal warning that reverberates beneath the noisy surface of our modern world. It is a reminder that the case is not yet closed. And so this grand cosmic legal drama, which began in the highest courts of heaven, finally comes to rest in the most intimate and personal of all courtrooms, the courtroom of your own heart. The story of Lucifer's trial is not a distant historical spectacle for us to observe with detached curiosity. It is a sacred mirror, and the reflection it shows is a portrait of the trial that is taking place right now within your own soul. The same indictment that was brought against the Anointed Cherub is the same fundamental question that is being put to you every single day. The case is not about a spectacular celestial rebellion. It is about the quiet, constant, and often secret rebellions of your own will. The trial is not being held on the holy mountain of God, but in the mundane moments of your daily life, in a conversation with your spouse, in a decision at your workplace, in the way you spend your money, in the secret thoughts you entertain when no one else is watching. The sacred mirror of this story forces us to ask a series of deeply uncomfortable diagnostic questions. In the trial of your own life, which side are you on? When your will comes into direct conflict with the will of your Creator, which one do you ultimately serve? Are you living as a loyal citizen of His kingdom, seeking to align your life with His laws and His purposes, even when it is difficult, even when it costs you something? Or are you, in the secret chambers of your heart, a participant in the ongoing rebellion, quietly seeking to build your own small kingdom, to exalt your own small throne, and to live by your own set of rules? This is not a question of perfection, it is a question of allegiance. No one can live a life of perfect obedience, but everyone, in every moment, is living out a fundamental allegiance. You are either, by a conscious act of will, submitting your life to the authority of the one true King, or you are, by default, operating as a citizen of the shadow government, a participant in the treason that began so long ago. The story of Lucifer's trial is a mirror that forces you to see your own reflection and to ask the ultimate legal question. In the great cosmic case of God versus rebellion, on whose side does your testimony fall? The sacred mirror has shown us our reflection. The indictment against Lucifer is an indictment against us all, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We have all, in our own ways, participated in the cosmic treason. We have all sought to exalt our own small thrones. We have all, in the secret courtrooms of our hearts, declared our own 5-point manifestos of "I will." We stand before the law of heaven, and we are all found guilty. If the story ended here, it would be a story of universal and eternal condemnation. But this is the moment where the entire narrative pivots. This is the crossroads of choice, for the God who is a perfect judge is also a perfect Father. And in an act of incomprehensible love and legal genius, He provided a solution to the very treason that sought to unseat Him. The good news of the gospel is that we, the guilty, have been provided with a defense attorney. We have an advocate. The Apostle John in his first epistle writes, "My little children, these things I write to you so that you may not sin. And if anyone sins, we have an advocate with the Father, Jesus Christ the righteous." Let us not rush past the legal power of that word. An advocate is not just someone who speaks on your behalf. An advocate is a legal representative who stands in your place, who takes your case, and who argues it before the judge. Christ did not come to be another prosecutor, to add His voice to the chorus of our accusers. He did not come to give us better arguments to defend ourselves. He came to be our defense. And how did He win the case? He did not argue that we were innocent. He freely admitted our guilt. But then He did something that shattered the legal foundations of the accuser's case. He stepped forward and paid our penalty Himself. The sentence for cosmic high treason was death, an eternal separation from the life of God. And on the cross, the advocate took that sentence upon Himself. He paid the legal price for our rebellion. He satisfied the just demands of the law of heaven. The choice, therefore, is no longer between guilt and innocence. We are all guilty. The choice is between self-representation and accepting the divine advocate. It is the choice between trying to argue our own case, a case we are destined to lose, and throwing ourselves upon the mercy of the court by accepting the perfect finished defense of the one who has already paid our fine in full. The cosmic court case against Lucifer, the first and greatest act of high treason, is not a closed file. Our investigation today has only unsealed the initial indictment and presented the primary evidence. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a much larger, more profound legal and historical inquiry. The implications of this primordial crime ripple outwards, touching every other mystery in the sacred texts. If you are a seeker of the uncensored truth, a spiritual archaeologist who is no longer content with the simplified narratives, then this is your invitation to join the expedition. This channel is not just a source of information, it is a community of forensic theologians, a jury of peers who are willing to examine the hard evidence, to ask the difficult questions, and to follow the trail of truth wherever it may lead. The story does not end here. The legal framework we have uncovered today is the key to understanding the subsequent crimes of the Watchers, the juridical basis for the Great Flood, and the cosmic legal battle that was ultimately won at the cross. There are other case files in the heavenly archives, other forgotten indictments and suppressed testimonies that are waiting to be unsealed. Share what this revelation of sin as a cosmic crime has stirred in you in the comments below. Your insights, your questions, and your own discoveries are a vital part of this collective investigation. And be ready, for our journey into the legal and political realities of the cosmic war has only just begun. The next case file is waiting.